Hello world, and we are back. My name's Fischl. This is going to be episode 188 of my poker vlog. For this one, I play a 1-3 deep stack, $1,000 max buy-in at One Eye Jacks at Sarasota, Florida. Before I get into the hands, I have two quick announcements. First, I am going to be tonight's guest on the Snap Call podcast. Be talking a bit about my journey in poker, some goals, a little bit of strategy, as well as some contemporary topics surrounding poker. So if you have any interest in hearing about that, please follow the link in the description below. Otherwise, search the Snap Call podcast on YouTube. You'll be able to find it there. Second is, after my appearance on the podcast, I will be playing online on Club GG. I stream this sometimes today. I'll just be playing. If you have any interest in mixing up with me on the virtual felt, you can message me on the Instagram or Telegram listed below. And a lot of people don't show their results, but the last 2 weeks, I've made over $500 in this club. So games are definitely soft. They are definitely winnable. So anyone wants to try their luck on the virtual felt, please message me. And we'll get you set up for that. And with that out of the way, let's roll the tape.
I'm happy that he called because $15 is the most I can lose here. Yeah. Hopefully he does not have two pair. He does not have two pair. Took me a second to realize that. Alright, kings are good. We take that. Easy game.
We buy into this 1-3 deep stack game for $800 before we get to the first hand of note. With an under the gun straddle, we look down at King Jack of Diamonds from the big blind when the small blind decides to call. I raised to $20. I think it's pretty standard. I think I'm ahead of a lot of these players' ranges. And for $20, both the straddler and the small blind decide to call. So we're three ways to a flop, which comes ace, ace, 6 with 2 hearts, 1 diamond. I think in general, if either of these players had a big ace, they would have raised themselves. They would not have limped or just called. So I think I get to bet here pretty liberally. All my medium pocket pairs and some of my backdoor draws get to bet here. So I bet $20. Both players decide to fold. So we start out this session getting a small bluff through. Good for the confidence, good for the momentum, and we're starting out on the right foot. After that, if you like the intricacies of pre-flop play, these next two hands are for you. With the button straddle, I look down at ace-king offsuit. The big blind limps, the hijack, and the cutoff limp. On the button, we don't even need a hand as strong as ace-king offsuit, but since we have it, we're going to raise up to $25. Taking it down pretty be fine, otherwise we have to build the pot. Play in position seems relatively good. The big blind decides to call, and then the first limper in the hijack decides to go all in for $235.
But how? How?
I hate under the gun limp jams. I think they're always nutted. What's even weirder is a hijack over limp jam. I think about this one for a long time, and I don't think my opponent can ever have queens plus here. I think those have to raise standardly. They can't just limp jam. But I think 8s, 9s, 10s seem to be in this range. Maybe ace queen suited, ace jack suited might do this once in a blue moon. Now that's all what I think is more standard when you do this play. But my opponent in particular in this one I think is on the tighter side. So maybe he does have pocket queens and kings in range here. My opponent also lost a very big pot the exact hand before this. So it might be a little bit of tilt, although you don't really see tight players tilt all that often. Either way, I think ace-king's good enough to get all in here. The player in the big blind doesn't look too interested, so don't really expect him to come alive. So thinking I'm going to get a 50-50 at worst with some dead money in there, I make the call. My opponent agrees to run it 2 times, so feeling decently about this one. The flop is ace-queen high. That kind of sucks. I think he has ace-queen at least some of the time. Run out doesn't really change much. Next board, with the flop, but turn a king, so we're at least chopping with ace-queen on this one, but my opponent has pocket jacks. Somehow I scoop on 2 runouts. Seems amazing. Really happy with how this one turned out. Before we get to the next interesting hand, I am under the gun with ace-queen of spades. I raised to $15. The hijack and the cutoff decide to call before the small blind raises to $45. Now the big blind calls, and it's on me. A lot of action in front of me, a lot of action. I have a good hand here, but not a great hand. I asked to see the small blind stack, and he has about $200 total. So thinking this might be the time for one of the weaker 4 bets I'm going to have. Happy to flip with the small blind for $200 with all the dead money in there. Thinking the big blind had a hand even strong enough to continue, he would have considered raising himself. Instead, he just calls the 45 pretty quickly. And the other 2 players that called for 15 shouldn't have a too strong of hand either. because they didn't 3-bet themselves. So I bump it up to $200, and upon making it $200, the small blind kind of asks for change out of turn. Kind of disrespectful, kind of think this is going to induce some action from my opponent some of the time, think he's pretty much done with it. Then before it gets to him, he forces himself to make change with the chips in front of me. Gotta say, I've never really seen that one before. But when the other two players who bet 15 decide to fold, he finally lets his cards go, and the big blind folds as well. So 4-bet, I guess semi-bluff, gets it through, take down over $100 of dead money. Sometimes some pre-flop play is definitely needed to be able to make some profit in this game. Next fun hand of poker, I make it $20 from middle position with Jack-9 of spades. Only the button calls, he was a straddler, so we're heads up to a flop of 9-7 deuce with 2 hearts. On this flop, I think I'm just going to c-bet. I have top pair. Although this doesn't connect to my range, I'm just hoping my opponent doesn't really know that and understand, range advantage and has a creative bluff raise. So I just bet $20. We're going to value bet our top pair, and my opponent makes the call. Turn is the 10 of clubs, so no spade, no backdoor draw for me, but I do pick up an 8 for a gutter. Thinking that my opponent's unlikely to have a 10 all too often, where he could have any 2 hearts, a random 7, maybe a worse 9 sometimes. I'm just going to bet again, hopefully get value from all those hands, and even if he just peeled with like king-queen because it's pretty and didn't want to give up to 1 bet, we can put those hands in a tough spot with a second half pot size bet of $45. Unfortunately for me, my opponent pretty quickly raises to $175.
That is bad news.
And I think about this one for a while. This opponent in particular had been very aggressive with flush draws, and they missed a few times previously. Does he continue to be aggressive with flush draws? Does he have it? If he has a flush draw, are there overs to go along with it? A lot of thoughts going through my head back and forth, but I just think that I'll have better spots going forward. I don't really need to take this one. We bet twice with a decent pair. When we face some resistance and we have to navigate the river out of position without a clear understanding of what cards we're even trying to fade, I think folding's just the better option here. So that's what I do, and we move on from there. I'm in the big blind. I have ace-10 offsuit with a button straddle, small blind limps. I make it $20 from middle position. A late position player decides to call, the button calls, and the small blind calls as well. So we end up going 4 ways to a flop, which comes king 10-8 with 2 hearts. Not having any hearts, having middle pair, having 3 opponents, I don't think this hand's too good to bet into 3 people. So when it checks to me, I decide that this is going to be a check, reevaluate turn. However, the later position player decides to bet $30. When it folds to me, I didn't check a middle pair best kicker to fold to a single bet, so we're going to call this one. And the turn is the 8 of spades. Now 2 spades on board. The third pair has now tripped up, so if my opponent had a random 8, he's beating me. That's somewhat horrible. But we are beating like Queen Jack, Jack 9, 9 7, plenty of straight draws that would have semi-bluffed when the pre-flop aggressor checked to them. We're also beating any 2 hearts as well, so I checked my opponent, not too worried just yet, and he checks it back. Alright, if I can get a safe river card, I can go for a bet myself, but the Jack of Diamonds is anything but safe. I lose to Queen Jack, Jack 9, Jack X of Hearts. I mean, basically everything. Even the Jack 10, one of the few, middle pairs that I was beating, also just river me. I check, pretty much done with this hand, and thankfully my opponent checks it back. That doesn't even mean I have the best hand. He could usually just have a random king here, but on this one, he has Queen 10. Literally the only second pair that I beat on this board. Definitely fun to win that one. Before we look down at pocket 6s, in this one, with a button straddle, the small blind just opens to 25. Very big open from kind of the under gun position. But big blind calls, middle position calls, which is me, late position calls, button calls. We are 5 ways, pocket 6s. Can we flop a set? So close on 9-7-5-2 diamonds. We do have the 6 of diamonds, so seems somewhat relevant to have a flush draw blocker and a gut shot straight draw. When the small blind checks, the big blind takes up the betting lead for 30. I consider raising here, but honestly I think the big blind is weighted more towards a single 9 and single 7, so I'm actually counting bluff outs on this one. By this I mean any card 10 or higher, I expect it to go big blind checks, I bet relatively big, and I just win the hand. Additionally, I get to apply aggression / continue on any 3, 4, 8, 6. A lot of good cards for me. One late position player decides to call as well. Not too happy to see that. The other 2 players fold. We are 3 ways to a turn card, which is the Ace of Hearts. Not really the card I want to see. mainly because any of these opponents could have ace-x of diamonds. The float large bet plan was really only viable when it's heads up, and when we're three ways, the player behind can have a ton of aces himself. So when it checks to me, I check, hoping to get closer to showdown, and the late position player bets $86.
Everything that guy just said is bullshit. Thank you.
Because that's a totally standard size, but not getting bogged down by that. Like I said, he could have any ace-x of diamonds. I don't really know how many complete air balls can float to people just playing position and then bet when it's checked to. So we're just giving him credit for an ace, maybe a hand with a ton of equity like a pair plus flush draw, pair plus straight draw. We're just going to let this one go, and we will never know what our opponent had. But that's okay. Now we're on the button. We look down at King 10 of clubs with one limp and early position player bets $20. I call from the button. The big blind calls and the limper calls. So we end up going four ways to a flop of 10, 8, 5 with two spades. Well, it checks to us. Not exactly sure what the perfect play is in four-way pots when you have top pair good kicker, but betting half pot can't be too bad, so that's what I do. Bet $40. And to this bet, the big blind and the early position limper decide to call. The preflop aggressor folds, but we're three ways to a turn, and the turn is the 9 of hearts. So now Queen Jack has the nuts, and even weirder, the big blind just leads out for 125. When the other player in the hand decides to fold, it's back on me. Kind of tough, but I do still have top pair good kicker. I choose to call this one because I think my opponent can easily have like Jack 10, Jack 9, Queen 10, Queen 9. Any pair plus straight draws that just kind of improved a little bit on this turn card. Might choose to lead here. Additionally, not sure how many straight gut shots get there, although 6-7 is open-ended on the flop. We're going to call here, reevaluate. Position is power in this game, and for 125, the river is the Queen of Hearts. Absolutely devastating card. Almost every two pair and straight draw I described has now completed. Hearts get there, although backdoor flush draws are somewhat less likely. When my opponent checks to me, this is not a snap check back. I think about turning my hand into a bluff, because if my opponent had like Jack 10, the Queen of Hearts hitting is kind of a bad one. And additionally, we can get like 6-7 to fold here some of the time. But I just decide I hope my opponent has like missed spades or a random worse 10 or pocket 6s, pocket 7s. Few hands I beat, I check it back. And I do end up winning against King 9 of spades. So our pair is good. He misses the spade flush draw. And we win a pretty big pot, fading a ton of outs. Next hand of note. I have King Jack of Hearts on the button. Early position makes it $15. We end up going five ways to a flop, as pretty standard in this game. Flop is Ace 10 7 2 hearts. We have a gutter and a nut flush draw. Feels amazing. Well, the player who is not the preflop aggressor leads for $30. And when it gets back to me, I'm not really ever folding this one. I actually could raise, but I think I block a lot of the somewhat misses that my opponent would fold. So thinking is a little heavier weighted towards an ace, I choose to just call. All three other players fold, so we are heads up to a turn card, which is the 3 of spades. When my opponent checks to me, position is amazing. He shouldn't have too many strong aces that check this one, especially with the obvious draws out there. So a bet here might get a 10 to fold, might get like pocket jacks, pocket 9s, something like that to fold. So we're going to go a little bit big with this, $85, trying to get some folds of those pairs that can't really hold on. But my opponent decides to make the call. The river is the king of clubs. We river a pair. We now beat jacks, queens, 10x, pocket 9s, and my opponent checks to me. Should I bluff and try to get an ace to fold? I mean, it's possible, but there are some total misses he could have. Any two hearts that aren't mine. Hoping he has like 8-9 just open-ended that couldn't give up on any street. So I check it back, take my showdown value, and we do not win this one versus ace 9 of clubs. Sad I couldn't get that ace to fold on the turn. But that's okay. Now we have King 10 offsuit. Getting a lot of King X hands this video. I'm in middle position with it. I raised to $15. The button, small blind, and big blind call. So we are four ways to a flop of 10, 4, 3 with 2 diamonds. We do have the king of diamonds, so that's very important to note here. When the small blind, big blind check to me, I'm just going to bet small. I have top pair. These opponents are calling with a lot of wide ranges, so 20 will be the bet. The button calls and the other two players fold, so we are heads up to a turn card, which is the Queen of Diamonds. Not too worried about flushes. Additionally, we have the second nut flush draw, but the fact that it's an overcard, I think I'm just going to play my hand like it's a pair of tens, and I check. When I check, my opponent bets $50. I'm definitely going to call. This opponent had been caught bluffing a few times. I would not ever classify him as a maniac, but definitely has the ability to bluff, so going to stick around, and the river is the 3 of clubs. When I check, my opponent thinks for a long time, counts out chips, adds more, counts out some more chips, adds some, puts some back, and then finally decides on a sizing of $125. And I choose to snap call this one. I do this because his opponent's been caught bluffing a few times. He could easily have 5-6, ace-5, ace-deuce, middling pocket pairs. I have seen this opponent bet river and have small pocket pairs that have been turned into bluffs. So beating plenty of hands, blocking some made flushes, and especially on the board pair river, I don't expect my opponent to even bet a flush that big. But none of that seems to matter. He had pocket tens, so got the case 10 on the flop, and I was destined to lose some amount of money on this one. Could have been much less, but sometimes you just gotta keep your opponents honest. On the next interesting hand, I have 9-7 of clubs. Under the gun, I raised to $15. A late position player and the button calls, so we're 3 ways to a flop. Of King 9-7 rainbow, flopping 2 pair is a great feeling, especially when it's bottom 2. The king is totally available to anyone to have, and we get to value bet it pretty happily. I bet $15, not expecting these opponents to fold pretty much any piece. However, the late position player folds, but the button sticks around, so I'm hoping for a low, unconnected card on the turn. But the Queen of Spades is very much not what I'm looking for. King, Queen, very possible. Queen 9, Jack 10, plenty of 2 pairs and straight draws, all complete with this one. I decided to check this one. I think if I had Ace King, I would do the same, so balancing it with a 2 pair seems pretty reasonable, as well as if I had like 10-8 or 8-6, I might check here hoping to get to see a free river card. And my opponent checks it back, so we're pretty confident we have the best hand. And the Deuce of Spades river is the offsuit low brick we were looking for. So now we can pretty happily value bet against any king, any queen, single pairs. Please pay me $50 is the bet. My opponent does not look happy, but counts it out pretty quickly. Just shuffles it for a minute, and then eventually slides in the middle. Flip over the 2 pair. Those are good. And it brings us to the final hand of note. Under the gun raises to $15. I'm in the +1 with pocket tens. We're going to 3-bet this one. We wouldn't always do this, but this player has shown some pretty wide opens, so we're pretty happy to 3-bet tens. We make it $45, pretty standard 3x, not really trying to go huge, not looking for folds. But it folds all the way to our under the gun opponent who makes the call. And we bink a full house on 10-3-3-2 clubs.
Down here, it's our time. It's our time down here.
This is amazing. This is a great feeling. My opponent called a 3-bet. Maybe he could have jacks still. Maybe he can have a club draw. A 3 would be unbelievably amazing. I could double up for that card. But we definitely want to keep him in there. So when he checks to us, we're going to check this one back. We have so much board locked up, and we'd hate to have our opponent fold any 2 cards at this point. Additionally, we give him a chance to bluff himself on the turn. So with top full house, we are going to check the flop. When the turn is the 5 of hearts, I think my opponent's going to lead here a decent percentage of the time. He definitely has some bluffs in range. Any pocket pair might feel pretty good, but he checks to me a second time. Well, I can't let it check through on the turn. Got to start building the pot, but since he checked 2 times and we have just a monumental amount of the board locked up, we're going to bet very, very small here on the turn. Only $35, just praying that he decides to continue, and he does, in fact, put in the call. The river is the Queen of Hearts, so that's a pretty bad one, unless my opponent exactly has Queen X of clubs. Come on, man. You can bet here. I've shown some weakness. You can do... Oh, he checked to me. Alright, I've been experimenting a lot with very small river bets, trying to get crying calls from weak hands, but I think this hand in particular functions better as a pot-size large bet. If I had ace-jack of clubs, I would be trying to buy it here, ace-king of clubs. I would be betting pretty big, so I think that I have a ton of misses here that want to bet huge. And I think because my opponent's relatively GTO, if he had full air, I think he would have bet the river as a bluff rather than just check give up. So hoping he has some kind of hand he can't fold, I bet $150, huge bet. Doesn't look like he's going to raise because it's not impossible he has a check raise random 3 here, but that is definitely not the case at this point. My opponent thinks for a long time, and out loud he keeps saying, you either have pocket aces, ace, queen, or missed clubs. And that's what I'm kind of trying to make it look like, although I probably don't have ace queen in this one. After a little bit more thinking, it turns out my opponent settled on thinking I had missed clubs. When he makes the call, I show a full house, and my opponent would later tell me he called with pocket nines. So I'd say we got pretty much max value on this one, going for a bluffy looking sizing on the river. Happy to take this one down. Biggest pot of the night leads me to rack up a decent sized win. In for $800, out for $1,270, which is a profit of $470 across 3 hours, equates to $156 an hour or 52 big blinds an hour. Yeah, today I'd say the most interesting hands were all based on pre-flop decisions, reversing a limp jam from late position, very unstandard. And then we choose to 4-bet the ace-queen suited. I know a lot of charts like that, but in these 1-3 and 2-5 live games, players are a lot more nitty than the computer would have you believe, so usually you have to adjust a bit tighter to match the player pool you're versing, but today we found some scenarios where playing somewhat aggressive and somewhat optimal were the correct strategies. And then, the final hand, pocket tens, flopping a full house. Feels like it's been forever since I've just flopped a monster, and the times that I do flop relatively good hands, I've gotten some pretty bad runouts as of late, but today was a fantastic day, decent profit, happy with how I played. And if you like how I play and the videos I make, please take a moment and subscribe. I would appreciate it, and I will see you on the next one.